all the work that you've done in seminary, with your doctoral work in the area of theology and manuscripts, what got you interested in the Bible?
I realized that I was engaging with a lot of people, with Muslims, with Mormons, with Jehovah's Witnesses, skeptics of all different stripes. All of them would resort to some sort of, well, that sounds great, Wes, but all you're relying on is the Bible. That's your foundation. And you can't trust that. All you have are translations of translations of translations. All you have are error-ridden copies. You don't even know if you have the right books. You're reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but have you ever heard of the Gospel of Thomas? And so I realized that that was a genuine critique if it was true. If that was true, I'm staking my entire life on the person of Jesus. And where do I find the information about Jesus? I find that in the Bible. And if I can't trust the Bible, I really have no reason to put my hope and trust in Jesus.
Hola, ¿qué tal amigos? Les doy la bienvenida a este canal Apología 360 y el día de hoy vamos a continuar con la segunda parte del video que hicimos anteriormente. ¿Podemos confiar en la Biblia? Y como mencionamos antes, la Biblia no es un solo libro, sino una colección de textos inspirados por Dios, escrito en un periodo de 1500 años con 40 autores diferentes, en 3 continentes distintos, con 3 lenguajes diferentes, pero con un solo mensaje: la culpabilidad del hombre y la fidelidad y el amor de Dios para restaurarlo a través de la persona de Cristo Jesús. Ahora esto nos lleva a hacernos una gran pregunta: ¿cómo saber que este libro es real? ¿Quién nos asegura que este libro no fue manipulado para promover una idea inventada? Pero sobre todo, ¿cómo podemos confiar en un texto que ha sido copiado y recopiado durante casi 2000 años? Para responder esta pregunta vamos a trasladarnos al enigmático Egipto de la mano de Wesley Huff, quien nos ayudará a entender el impacto de los descubrimientos más antiguos de las Escrituras.
Almost immediately after its production, the books of the Bible were being copied and translated into numerous languages and spread across the ancient world. This means that the modern English Bible we have today is some 2,000 years removed from even the last book written in it. How can we know that what we have was accurately copied and translated over that time? It was discoveries of ancient papyri in places like the city of Oxyrhynchus that allow us to answer this question. This city, on the banks of the River Nile, was where papyrus was being grown and made into writing material. It was in the garbage dumps of Oxyrhynchus where a treasure of ancient manuscripts was eventually discovered. In 1895, fresh graduate from Queen's College, England and Oxford, Bernard Grenfell and his friend Arthur Hunt left England on a trip to come to Egypt, sponsored by the Egyptian Exploration Society. Their purpose was not to find monumental architecture or statuary, which was the purpose of archaeology at the time, but to find papyri. After excavating a number of graveyards and cities to no avail, they eventually discovered here in and around the area of Al-Banasa, known then as Oxyrhynchus papyri. In fact, between 1895 and 1897, over 500,000 papyri were discovered, including every book of the Bible and a number of influential classical and religious texts.
Y claro, puede que alguien esté pensando, espera un segundo, ¿entonces la Biblia ha sido copiada mal durante siglos? ¿He estado creyendo en algo que no tiene fundamento? Tranquilos, vamos a ver la respuesta de Wesley Huff al respecto.
I'm here at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, and I'm looking at P1. P1 is the second manuscript discovered. The story goes that Grenfell was walking through the desert and looking down saw a corner of what is now P1 sticking out of the sand. What was discovered by Grenfell and Hunt in that winter season was this fragment of the Gospel of Matthew, written on both sides, that contained the genealogy of Jesus from the beginning of that Gospel.
Wes, I think a question that a lot of people ask is if these discoveries in places like Oxyrhynchus are fairly recent discoveries of these ancient manuscripts, well, what were we relying on before then, and could we trust our Bible? I mean, when we're comparing the Bible that we've had to these ancient manuscripts, like how does it line up?
When they discovered the earliest copies of the papyri, really within the last 200 years, what it didn't do was alter the way that we understood the text of the Bible before that. Even though we had these large spans of time in between when the earliest copies or the originals are being written and when we start to, think of the King James Bible in the early 17th century, when we discovered the papyri, what they didn't do was completely blow up how we understood the text of the Bible. In fact, what they did is simply confirm that what we had was surprisingly, shockingly close to the text that we had even centuries and millennia later.
Y contrario a lo que podríamos pensar, el descubrimiento de manuscritos más antiguos de los que se usaban tradicionalmente no pusieron en duda el texto bíblico, sino todo lo contrario. Confirmaron que las copias que habíamos estado utilizando, especialmente el texto bizantino, eran increíblemente fieles. Y eso es sorprendente porque el texto bizantino se había preservado y transmitido durante siglos sin acceso a esos manuscritos más antiguos. Fue como encontrar un documento viejo y darte cuenta de que coincide casi palabra por palabra con las copias más recientes. En este sentido, uno de los descubrimientos más importantes fueron los rollos del Mar Muerto, descubiertos entre 1947 y 1951 y que se datan entre el año 250 a.C. o el año 70 después de Cristo. Se encontraron más de 1000 manuscritos, incluyendo casi todo el Antiguo Testamento, a excepción del libro de Esther. ¿Y sabes qué fue lo más impactante de todo esto? Que esos textos eran prácticamente idénticos a los manuscritos antiguos que teníamos hasta ese momento. Un ejemplo impresionante es el libro de Isaías, que mostró una exactitud del 98% al compararse con copias hechas siglos después, entre los siglos XII y XX. Esto nos demuestra algo crucial. La Biblia no solo ha sido conservada, sino que ha sido copiada y traducida cuidadosamente desde su origen. Por ejemplo, en Alejandría entre los siglos II y III a.C. se tradujo el Antiguo Testamento del hebreo al griego. Esa traducción se conoce como la Septuaginta. Esto nos confirma que la tradición judeocristiana ha sido desde siempre una tradición literaria, una comunidad que copiaba, traducía y preservaba con sumo cuidado sus escritos sagrados. Y precisamente Wesley nos ayuda a entender con más claridad este punto.
Although translated into many languages, the Bible is not itself a translation of a translation. Like we see in the example of the Septuagint, Judeo-Christianity has always been a literary tradition that has never stopped copying and translating its books in order to be read. Almost immediately after its production, the books of the Bible were being copied and translated into numerous languages across the ancient world. When we look back at how we actually go from ancient papyrus to modern-day print, the history of the Bible is not some sort of layered web of translations. In reality, what we find ourselves with is a single step, going from the original Hebrew and Greek directly into our Bibles today. The translation of the Bible takes into consideration an amazing collection of archaeological evidence, from discoveries in Israel like the Dead Sea Scrolls, to papyri dug up in places like Oxyrhynchus. Over time, as we've uncovered more of these fragments and manuscripts, they haven't complicated our understanding of the Bible, but clarified it. The documents that sit behind the history of the Bible and the way that we translate them today gives us confidence in their reliability to go from the original languages into our own. Even though we're almost 2,000 years removed from the last book of the Bible that was written, as discoveries are made, we are not getting farther away from the text, but getting closer. This evidence confirms and gives us good reason to trust that our Bibles have been faithfully and accurately copied, and that what we have now is what the original authors wrote.
Entonces lo que estamos viendo con todos estos descubrimientos arqueológicos y manuscritos es que nos acercamos cada vez más a los textos originales y eso nos da muchísima confianza. Ahora bien, alguien podría decir, ok, pero ¿me estás diciendo que todos los manuscritos son idénticos? La respuesta honesta es no. Por supuesto que hay diferencias. Y eso también lo explica Wesley Huff.
The thing I've always appreciated about the Bible is it's not trying to hide anything from you. It, in fact, will note when there is a difference. If it's a word or if something was missing in a different manuscript, it'll tell you.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think, when they see that there are differences within the manuscripts, they panic. They think that's a problem. And they see our Bible has been changed. And I would say, yes, that is true to a certain degree. But our Bible has been changed, and that doesn't give us a picture of confusion within the history of the Bible. It actually gives us clarity within understanding the text of the Bible. When we have these differences, the fact is we know that there are the differences. So when you read your modern translation of the Bible and you see a citation note at the bottom of the page, that shouldn't make you panic. What that should do is give you confidence that we have such a glut of information that we're able to pinpoint those things to a very credible and exact level.
One of the things that catches a lot of people off guard when they're reading the Bible is they'll come across a verse that's missing, and that might surprise some of you, something like John chapter 5, verse 4. There isn't a John chapter 5, verse 4. So how do we understand that? Why are there verses in our Bible missing?
Yeah, I think people, when they come on these quote-unquote missing verses, it kind of surprises them. They'll look at their modern English translation and they'll see there's no John chapter 5, verse 4. And they go back and it's in their King James. So who took that verse out and when? Well, realistically, it's not about who took that verse out and when, it's about who put that verse in and when. And because we have such a glut of information in regards to the manuscript tradition and the text of the Bible, we're able to pinpoint when those things happened. Because of this, we're able to figure out, okay, a scribe at some point in history, say, wrote what we now have, because remember, the verses were added much later. They're not original to the text. The chapter and verse divisions were added in later centuries. And so when we find out John didn't write what we have in John chapter 5, verse 4, but a later scribe wrote that, well, we don't reverse the entire Bible. That's going to mess up all of our Bible memorization. It's going to mess up all of the commentaries that have been written throughout history that do include the verses. And so what we do is we simply put John chapter 5, verse 4, and we add a citation note at the end of the page.
Okay, the early...
Y lo que Wesley Huff nos está mostrando aquí es sumamente importante. Sí, existen diferencias entre los manuscritos, pero esas diferencias nos permiten rastrear y depurar el texto original con mucha más precisión. Son variaciones menores, comentarios de copistas, omisiones accidentales, repeticiones que no afectan en lo más mínimo el mensaje central. Aún así puede que alguien insista y nos diga, ¿y no debería acaso eso hacernos desconfiar del texto? Vamos a ver qué plantea Huff al respecto.
That be the case, Wes, why do the scribes make some of these changes in the text?
Well, a lot of them are just mistakes, and mistakes you and I would make if we were handwriting documents. You know, I do this all the time.
I do this a lot.
In my emails, all my froms are forms, that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be handwriting, but when you're dealing with handwriting, we do make mistakes. The vast majority of these textual variants, of these scribal changes, are spelling differences. Because remember, spelling was not organized or standardized till much later. But if I spell Andy with 2 D's or 1 D, you can still figure out that I'm trying to write Andy. And a lot of them, they didn't even necessarily catch these changes. So the vast majority are things like spelling, our word order. You know, as long as there are particular grammatical and syntactical linguistic clues, we can figure out what the sentence says. So the vast majority of these differences within the Bible are inconsequential and make no difference in the translation out of the original language.
Y ahí lo tenemos, amigos. Ninguna de las diferencias encontradas cambia una sola de la doctrina esencial del cristianismo. No es que en los textos originales dijera que hay muchas formas de salvarse y algún copista malintencionado cambió eso para decir que solo en Jesús hay salvación. Nada de eso. La mayoría de los errores son repeticiones de letras, palabras o algunas anotaciones marginales. Es decir, cosas humanas normales que ocurren al copiar cualquier texto. Y como cristianos yo creo que esto nos ayuda a entender y a creer que este libro al que le llamamos Biblia ha sido preservado por Dios durante los siglos para que tú y yo podamos hoy tenerlo en nuestras manos. Del mismo modo también creo que este sacrificio que hicieron muchas personas que literalmente dieron su vida por este libro, debemos valorarlo de una mejor manera porque gracias a ellos tenemos hoy la Biblia en nuestros libreros o incluso en el celular. Y creo que la mejor forma de hacer valer ese sacrificio es no dejarlo que se empolve ese libro. No dejar que sea un adorno más en nuestra casa o una app más olvidada en nuestro celular. Y la mejor forma de honrar ese sacrificio es abriendo este libro con reverencia, leyéndolo con hambre, atesorándolo en el corazón, pero sobre todo viviéndolo con mucha pasión. Porque cada palabra en esa página es algo más que tinta en un pedazo de papel. Es vida, es verdad, es la voz eterna de Dios hablándonos el día de hoy. Que nunca se nos olvide, amigos, que lo que muchos murieron por preservar, hoy nosotros estamos llamados a proclamar con valentía y a vivir con fidelidad. Que la llama de su palabra nunca se apague entre nosotros. Esto ha sido todo por hoy. Gracias por ver este video. Dale like, compártelo con tus amigos. Suscríbete a este canal y recuerda, la fe cristiana no es ciega, es razonable y es viva.